We're back. The podcast is back. The podcast you love to hate or don't care about at all. These are the options available to you. I'm Casey McLean. By the way, come see me do stand-up comedy. I'll be at Seven Cedars Casino with Gabriel Rutledge next Wednesday in Squim. And our show at Bickerson's Brewhouse is back and in full effect. It's going to be quarterly going forward, unless we either start selling more tickets or it goes away completely. Those are probably the two options. Corey Michaelis headlining, very funny guy. I got to do his shows this weekend at Everett Historic Theater and at Enumclaw's Chalet Theater, opening for my buddy Matthew Broussard, which was very, very fun. Nice to there's been, I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast. I've talked about it on podcasts. I was in a comedy slump, I would say. Like probably I recorded my special in, what was it, in April or March? And I like absolutely was on a slump. I've been in a slump. I've new material starting to finally hit, and that was nice. It's finally starting to work, but boy, I was fighting it for a while, so that was fun. 500 plus people, both shows, pretty awesome. Matthew Broussard, by the way, one of the best comics working right now. Go check that out. Yeah, it was like, I would say, like, for a Seattle fan, not necessarily the biggest sports weekend in the world, but the Seahawks did hire Klint Kubiak. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And a bunch of former Seahawks coaches got hired. Two of them in head coaching jobs. We'll talk about both those guys, which will be fun. And the Mariners continue to do nothing. So, I don't have a lot to say about that. We'll talk about it probably right at the very end before I end the podcast. Anyway, please, by the way, feel free to chat in, give me your comments on what's happened over the weekend. So the Seahawks hired Klint Kubiak to be their offensive coordinator. And I got to tell you, I've been wanting the Seahawks to have a coach named Kubiak for the better part of 20 years. Klint Kubiak's dad, Gary Kubiak, is one of the architects of like the modern zone blocking run game. Him and a guy named Alex Gibbs in Denver really created this running system. Or if you remember those Denver teams in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was plug and play. Remember Terrell Davis ran for 2,000 yards and then he got hurt, and like Olandis Gary and Mike Anderson and oh my God, there were other guys that you're like, this guy is a nothing. This guy is not a real NFL running back. Clinton Portis obviously was great. Had really productive years. I'm gonna see if I can pull up some of those. I think if we just look at the Denver Broncos encyclopedia on Pro Football Reference, you're gonna see like the leading rusher was crazy. They're guys that I can't even remember. Oh yeah, who is Davis? Oh, that's Terrell Davis again. My bad. Terrell Davis. But there was Olandis Gary, Mike Anderson, Clinton Portis, Ruben Drones. Mike Anderson as a what? Like a 32-year-old in 2005 led them in rushing. Is that right? Yeah. And then who is this? Tatum Bell. God, you remember Tatum Bell? And, man, some of these guys, Selvin Young. Selvin Young didn't have a 1,000-yard season, though. No, as a rookie, he had a 729-yard season, but averaged, 5.2 yards per attempt. That's my point, is like those Denver teams, those Gary Kubiak coordinated Denver teams, and then the teams that he had when he was the head coach of Houston, those teams could run the ball really well. And at the time, he was taking advantage of these offensive linemen who were less valued than they were worth. These kind of like smaller guys that can move a little bit and go block at the second level. And a lot of teams are doing that now. It's not as innovative now. So Klint Kubiak, his son, a guy who's had like moderate success, I would say, as an NFL coordinator, felt like a safe pick. A guy who has called plays for multiple teams in multiple years. I will say it felt like a very Pete Carroll hire. And I'm going to say a lot of nice things about Pete Carroll later. He never hired an offensive coordinator that excited me one bit. Darrell Bevell Maybe because Darrell Bevell, I think I like Darrell Bevell more in retrospect than I did when the Seahawks hired him. I believe he was also a Minnesota Vikings offensive coordinator, by the way, which is a role that um, Klint Kubiak held at one point. The Darrell Bevell was just boring, middle of the road, like classic West Coast offense guy. And I guess like Klint Kubiak, he's got some exposure to the Kyle Shanahan tree. He's got, obviously, his dad is Gary Kubiak. He's coached in this like kind of zone blocking, run heavy, but West Coast offense style offense. And that's safe. That feels very safe and very conservative. From an offensive perspective, it feels very much like a Pete Carroll hire, which maybe means it feels very much, or maybe it means it's a John Schneider hire, that it doesn't feel like a Pete Carroll hire. What I'm identifying as a Pete Carroll hire is a John Schneider hire. Maybe that's true, but it was boring. Does that mean it's bad? It was boring. I hate rooting for a team that is handling their strategy and tactics in a conservative way. It's very frustrating because the league is progressing all over the place and you always want your team to be on the leading edge of stuff like that. And it feels like on offense, at least, the Seahawks, and this was the risk, of course, when they hired Ryan Grubb, was that whatever he was doing, they weren't happy with. I would argue he deserved a second year. That's not my fight to make, right? Like, that's not my fight to fight. But now they had the opportunity to hire someone else. I anticipated it would be someone who has play calling experience. They interviewed a bunch of guys. Grant Udinski was the most like talked about probably besides Klint Kubiak because he's this young wonderkin from Minnesota, 28 years old. And one thing I will say is quarterback's coach is an upgrade for him career-wise. The Seahawks might not be out of the Grant Udinski business. I actually don't know. I don't know if Minnesota has bumped him up to make him harder to, because they're not going to make him the offensive coordinator in Minnesota, but if they make him the quarterback's coach, the way the NFL works, I think you can interview for any job that would be an upgrade over your job, and there's criteria for what makes it an upgrade. And anyway, Grant Udinski could still be on the table. That would have been exciting. Hiring Grant Udinski, a guy who has not called plays, who's not even been a quarterback's coach in the NFL, to be the Seahawks offensive coordinator would have obviously been exciting, but it would have been divisive. It would have been risky. I'm not risk averse as a person, certainly not from my sports teams. Like, I like to see sports teams that I root for taking risks. Grant Udinski would not have been, or would have been a huge risk. And I don't think it's one that Mike Macdonald could afford to make at this point. If Mike Macdonald goes 9-8, 10-7 for the next 2 years, but misses the playoffs both years, 3 years as the Seahawks coach without making the playoffs, it's probably the end of Mike Macdonald in Seattle, frankly. So, yeah, I would say now what I will say, one thing that I will say about Klint Kubiak is last week I talked about how the Seahawks might have a budget quarterback option that's pretty good for the price in Kirk Cousins. If the Atlanta Falcons release Kirk Cousins, he'll be on the same trajectory as Russell Wilson was, where any team that signs him is only responsible for whatever. They don't have to take on his salary in Atlanta. And in fact, Atlanta is paying him a guaranteed salary in 2025, regardless of where he plays. The only thing that would reduce how much Atlanta pays is if he signed a deal with another team, and then they pay him just his salary less what he makes with the new team. So Kirk Cousins has no incentive to make the Seahawks or a team that signs him pay a bunch of money. In fact, the Seahawks, I might not have explained this very well based on the comments on that. I posted a clip of it, by the way. I'm not arguing that Kirk Cousins is markedly better or markedly worse than Geno Smith. I have these guys in roughly the same category. I mean, I think Geno had a better year in 2024, but I also, were the Seahawks to have had Michael Penix sitting behind Geno Smith, it's possible that Michael Penix takes over for Geno Smith midseason also. So if you view those guys as roughly the same caliber of quarterback, and you could pay Kirk Cousins the same thing Russell Wilson was paid by the Steelers this year. Not what Russell Wilson made in 2024, but what he was paid by the Steelers, which was $1.1 million. Even if you have to cut Geno Smith, which I don't necessarily think I want the Seahawks to do, but I also don't know that there's going to be a vast trade market for Geno Smith. I certainly don't think there's going to be a lot of people out there that want to pay him $30+ million a year. We saw that a couple years ago. I don't think that this year is the platform year to get him his, Baker Mayfield extension. To me, if you can get the same play for roughly $30 million less, and you have to cut Geno Smith to save that $30 million, because by the way, Geno Smith's his cap number is like $44 million, but he's got like $13 million in dead cap, which brings it down to $31 million in savings. If you paid Kirk Cousins $1.1 million, that's where we get to the $30 million. You save $30 million. Now, the Seahawks are $27 million over the cap, so that immediately pulls them out of the cap hell that they're in. So here's the question, because you gotta get down that amount. Are the Seahawks better off with Geno Smith and not, let's say, DK Metcalf and Noah Fant? You have to trade away DK Metcalf. You have to cut Noah Fant. They're probably, no matter what they do, they're probably not going to bring back Tyler Lockett on his present deal or Draymond Jones at all, period. But is Geno Smith minus DK Metcalf minus Noah Fant, or Kirk Cousins, DK Metcalf, and Noah Fant? Or maybe more accurately, let's say you're going to move on from all those guys, which I do think is a possibility. I think everybody should be considered movable, tradable in the offseason if they have value. How about Geno Smith or Kirk Cousins plus 2 high-quality interior linemen? Who's better? What's better? To me, those guys aren't. I actually think Geno Smith is a slightly better quarterback than Kirk Cousins. But who do I think would provide the most value? Geno Smith or Kirk Cousins, and the pieces you could afford because you're opting for Kirk Cousins instead of Geno Smith? I'm probably going the guys that you can afford that package with Kirk Cousins. So to compound on that, by the way, Klint Kubiak coached Kirk Cousins in Minnesota in his most productive years. I think 2019 through 2021. I think that's right. Let me go back to the. Yeah, so he was quarterbacks coach in 19 and 20, offensive coordinator in Minnesota in 21, and Kirk Cousins in those years had what do you have? Come on now. 3,600 yards, 26 touchdowns, 6 interceptions in 2019. He had 42, 65, 35, and 13 in 2021, he had 4,221 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 2-time Pro Bowler in the time that Klint Kubiak coached him. Is this the same Kirk Cousins? Almost certainly no. But Kirk Cousins had like 0 mobility in 2024. I believe that, I remember it was some just preposterously high shotgun snap percentage for a guy that just could not move around. But and he's coming off of, in the years that followed Klint Kubiak in Minnesota, he had more interceptions, a higher interception rate anyway, I should say. And last year he led the NFL in interceptions. But again, he's still recovering from an Achilles injury that happened somewhat late in the season. He's an older quarterback. Is the Kirk Cousins that's available potentially, assuming the Falcons cut him, which I do think will happen, but it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. Is that Kirk Cousins, 37-year-old, 2 years removed from an Achilles tear, as good as the 2019 through 2021 Kirk Cousins? No, I don't think so. Is that guy better than the guy from 2024? Probably. That guy was not great. I will grant that. I don't think that Kirk Cousins is a long-term solution at quarterback. But if you have to weigh these two short-term solutions against each other, Kirk Cousins or Geno Smith, all things being equal, I would like Geno Smith, but all things are not equal. Geno Smith is significantly more expensive. And there's all this talk about like, oh, if you get rid of Geno, you lose the locker room. Well, it's 2 years without being in the playoffs. Fuck the locker room. We're done caring about the locker room. Anyway, Klint Kubiak, like I said, feels like a Darrell Bevell type hire. Feels like a Pete Carroll hire. It's not exciting. I'm not. It's just such like it feels like such a milquetoast. It reminded me of when what's his name, Jim Mora hired Greg Knapp. It's just this kind of hyper conservative, conventional wisdom hire, no risk, low risk, most defensible thing. And we're at a time in the NFL where we're seeing teams going for it on fourth down and teams taking real risks in game, outside of the game, innovating away from the field. There was a great Dan Vien's friend of the podcast, former guest of the podcast, shared a thread about how Jaden Daniels is doing a bunch of training through VR. Like, we are in an innovative time in football, and this feels like a step backwards in innovation. Does that mean it's going to be worse in 2025 than Ryan Grubb was in 2024? I mean, no, but that doesn't mean that it would be better than Ryan Grubb would have been in 2025. I mean, he could be better also. Also, I could be underestimating Klint Kubiak. I'm telling you, not exciting to me in any way. It's the expected move, but it's nothing that excites me. There's no part of me that's like, this guy's an expert at anything. The only thing that's exciting about Klint Kubiak, from my perspective, this is not a guy who's sat down and watched film of Klint Kubiak offenses or read every interview about him. I'm a guy that's like aware of the relative success and relative mediocrity he's produced in his career, and the fact that his last name is Kubiak. Maybe that means that Gary Kubiak becomes some sort of consultant with the Seahawks. That would be kind of exciting, but we're also like, we're 20 years removed from when Gary Kubiak was making the Broncos have one of the best running attacks in the history of the NFL. Also, so Pete Carroll got hired by the Las Vegas Raiders, which is certainly not on the list of teams that I would have guessed would have gone after Pete Carroll. It's interesting to me that a team that was consulted by, influenced heavily by one of their new owners, Tom Brady. At least that seems to be the guy that everyone thinks Tom Brady's signing off on this deal. That seems to be the like prevailing wisdom, is that every decision in Las Vegas goes through Tom Brady. For him to go get a guy who had relative success against him, but it did not seem like two guys who were like obvious buddies. In the same offseason, by the way, as Mike Vrabel got hired. Gerard Mayo obviously gets fired, but like Josh McDaniels gets hired as an offensive coordinator. I guess Josh McDaniels was already in Vegas and maybe burnt that bridge. But my point is, like, Pete Carroll did not seem like a guy that was an obvious fit for Las Vegas. And so he goes there, and I got to tell you right away, my feeling about Pete Carroll going to Las Vegas is, first off, the fact that every Seahawks fan, every serious Seahawks fan has been clocking where Pete Carroll would end up, has been invested in where Pete Carroll would end up, did not want him to end up with Chicago. Most of us, I think, because of I don't know. I'm not a Caleb Williams fan. I don't think Caleb Williams is going to be I will say I was not like the guys that I liked in last year's draft, the guys that I thought had the highest floor, I guess. I think Michael Penix has an extremely high floor. I was skeptical of Jaden Daniels. I was skeptical of Drake May. Both those guys look very good. Skeptical of Bo Nix. Skeptical of J.J. McCarthy. Caleb Williams, to me, feels like he's going to be an absolute bust. Like, he's going to... And he had, by the way, he started the year off pretty bad, but had, like, a pretty efficient, or at least prevented turnovers quite a bit in the second half of the year. I don't know. Sometimes I have a feel for these things. Kirk Cousins, for example, as what was he, a fourth round pick? I was a huge fan of Kirk Cousins coming out of Michigan State. Sometimes I'm wrong. I was not a big RG3 fan. I loved Andrew Luck. That was the same draft, by the way. But then, like, I could go back. There's some drafts where you're like, I don't think that Brock Osweiler is going to do it. I thought Nick Foles was going to suck, and he had moments. But so Pete Carroll coaching the Raiders, it made me jealous of Raiders fans because even when the Seahawks were mediocre, which is like, most of the last decade, Pete Carroll's so fun. He makes the game so fun. Mike Macdonald is not a fun coach to watch. And to this point, I mean, the defense had moments, had sparks, had stretches of dominance, but like right now, so far, that defense hasn't been particularly fun to watch either. I mean, the Leonard Williams like heroic run notwithstanding, it has not been like a super fun stretch or it was not like a super fun season to watch the Seahawks. And when Pete Carroll was there, like he was fun the whole time. It was fun the whole time. Sorry, I'm pulling up I'm going to try to not have it come through with chat. I just want to make sure of one thing. Oh, shit. It was coming through the exact way I didn't want it to. Yeah. So, Pete, again, like, I don't know what Pete's got left as far as, is he going to call plays at all? Is he just going to be like the CEO, the on-field CEO of the team? How much influence is he going to have over personnel? Or is his job simply going to be to come to Las Vegas and set the culture for the team, which is what I've heard a lot of people suggest. And I think the one thing he's maybe still an expert in is setting the culture in a locker room. And then you even hear stuff like Russell Wilson would consider playing for Pete because they've mended fences, and that would be such an amazing fit and a great way for both those guys, for Russell Wilson to kind of, I think, erase some of the ills that faced him at the end of his Seahawks career. And I think Russell Wilson's a guy who's very aware of his legacy. I think he's a guy who wanted to be better than Tom Brady. And now he's far enough into his career with one Super Bowl and limited recent success that he knows that's not going to happen. But he would still like to build his legacy. When he left Seattle, all he had to do pretty much for the end of his career was just not absolutely crater as a player to make the Hall of Fame. And then he absolutely cratered as a player. He was terrible in Denver. He was fine in Pittsburgh last year, but not great. And if he ended up in Las Vegas, one, I'd be happy for both guys. Be happy to see those guys back together. I think it'd be great for his legacy. And I would like to see Russell Wilson complete a Hall of Fame career. All right. The other coach that got hired, which by the way throws some hot water on or cold water on a theory I had. Brian Schottenheimer, formerly the Seahawks offensive coordinator, formerly the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator. The Dallas Cowboys, who fired Mike McCarthy, their offensive-minded coach, after the offense was not that good, hired Brian Schottenheimer to be their to be their head coach, which makes very little sense. And I would say, like, typically when a team hires a coach, I would think that puts an end to any speculation about Bill Belichick. But you look at Brian Schottenheimer and you're like, how long does he get? My thought was that Bill Belichick would take over the Cowboys before the season started. He's got this June 1st deadline where his buyout drops. I talked about it a bunch. Brian Schottenheimer is such a placeholder, nothing mannequin of a coach. And I mean, he's fine. Whatever, he's fine. You want to talk about Klint Kubiak not being exciting? Brian Schottenheimer is like biting into a saltine cracker. This dude, that is the least exciting hire arguably the least deserving hire of the past several years. Like, who does he coach? He coaches these really disappointing Cowboys teams, coaches a really disappointing Jacksonville team, coaches some very disappointing Seahawks teams. And then what? Like, what? Before that, it's like all, he was an offensive coordinator for the Rams 2012 to 2014. I believe those are Jeff Fisher Rams teams. Those aren't exciting teams. What is Jerry Jones thinking? I don't know. I heard an interview with the person that runs the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders, like the enterprise that is the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders, does the auditions. Maybe she's the coach or the general manager of the cheerleaders. They're like a huge institution in Dallas. If you're not a Cowboys fan and you're not a huge football fan, it's got to seem kind of weird that the cheerleaders are such a big deal, but the Cowboys cheerleaders are a big deal. Let her be the offense. Let her be the head coach. She seemed more interesting and at least more. Certainly not. I mean, we're being a little bit hyperbolic, but for real, let her run that team instead of let her run it instead of Jerry Jones. Her personnel selection ability is a little bit better. Okay. I don't know. Those championship games, by the way, they were, I assume everyone watched the championship games. I'm getting notifications of motion detected at my porch right now. The championship games were fun. I don't believe that the Chiefs, I don't think the league is rigged for the Chiefs. I will say the Josh Allen reach for a first down that I don't think it was fishy. I understand why they couldn't overturn it. It seemed like he was a little closer than the spot was. I'm not certain based on the angle because the angle of the camera is behind the play. So it's not perfectly obvious from the shot on screen. You need a shot down the pylon. The shots that they saw, I'm not certain either direction, right? And because they called it a fourth or a turnover on downs on the field, it has to stay a turnover on downs in that case, I believe. Still, who were you rooting for? Because to me, it was like, I'm not interested in the Eagles winning. I'm not interested in a rookie quarterback winning, really, although Jaden Daniels is very exciting. But, like, I would love to see the guy that wins a Super Bowl that's a rookie be a Seahawk. The only team that I was really rooting for at that point, let me actually pull up my my spreadsheet that everyone cared about. I'm going to guess the Bills were at the top of that spreadsheet, but let me make sure that's true. Yeah, so remaining were... the Eagles were actually tied with the Bills. My brother-in-law, and so were the Commanders. The Chiefs were the clear less desirable team to make it to the Super Bowl. I would have liked to see the Bills. I also think, like, as you get older, as you're just like, if you're an old man sports fan, watching greatness becomes more enticing than, like, I don't know, seeing your team have mediocre success. You want to experience greatness because as a sports fan, you just enjoy it. Like, the end of Brady's career, the Super Bowl he won in Tampa Bay was, to me, like an absolute iconic Brady thing because it was after this feud with Belichick and Robert Kraft, and they had essentially chosen Belichick and chosen wrong, we now know, and that was amazing to watch. I was rooting for Tom Brady in that game. Like, I was rooting at the end of his career for Brady to just keep piling on Super Bowls because why would I not want to have watched the greatest player ever? I want LeBron to do something that makes it obvious that he's better than Michael Jordan because I do think that he's better than Michael Jordan, but Jordan had 6 championships and was, by the way, like, not to say this is everything, had a kind of more beautiful play style than LeBron James. I mean, Jordan was just poetry in the air, in motion, but also in the air. And LeBron is physically dominant, but it's like a hybrid between Shaq and Kobe, where he just like physically dominates people sometimes, and that's not as fun to watch. Like, fucking Jordan looked like a ballerina flying through the air. I don't know if that's really a reference that I deserve to be making, frankly. I've never seen a ballet in my life, but he looked just graceful and majestic, and LeBron is dominant. I like, there was a point in the Barry Bonds saga where I had to stop caring about the steroid thing, because it's like, whatever this dude is on, what he's doing is unprecedented in the history of baseball. He was essentially as dominant as Babe Ruth, but in a time when players all had access to not only steroids, but also like exercise equipment, and they weren't working second jobs in the offseason. McGuire, Sosa, like, these were exciting runs. Clemens during that time was incredible. Even Kurt Schilling, I mean, these guys were incredible to watch. Of course they were corrupting the game, but like at a point I had to just sit back and go like, this is amazing. This is a spectacle. So I feel that same way about Patrick Mahomes. In fact, probably the guy that's like, I think the biggest underdog story obviously was Washington, and that's who I was rooting for the least when it all comes down to it. My brother-in-law's an Eagles fan, so I'm going to be rooting against the Eagles in the Super Bowl because he's my brother-in-law and I got to give him shit. But I almost don't care. I guess like I'm rooting for the Chiefs because I want to see greatness. I want Patrick Mahomes to challenge Tom Brady. Wouldn't that be fucking awesome to watch, as long as you could sprinkle in some Seahawks Super Bowls in the middle of it? Wouldn't that be great? It'd be great for me anyway. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about, I guess, is the Mariners they remain stagnant, and that's not unexpected. We should have all resigned ourselves at this point to the idea that the Mariners are probably not going to have a major move in this offseason. There's still a couple guys out there. Pete Alonso, at the time of this recording, I believe Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman are both still available. And I've seen this idea floated a bunch, and I just think it's so like patently stupid. And I talked about it a little bit on the last episode, but this idea that the Mariners should go after a guy and to entice him, give him a 3-year deal, but with buyouts after the first and second year, with the idea that could easily become a short-term deal, as though that's what the Mariners, by the way, who knows what the fuck the Mariners are thinking, but as though the Mariners are so stupid that they like the idea of the potential for a short-term deal. Because I'll tell you why I don't like the buyouts as this enticing thing, this thing to entice the free agent. Buyouts are lose-lose for the Mariners, because if the player is good and he chooses to not buyouts, opt-outs. I think I said buyouts the whole time. If he chooses to opt out, the Mariners literally lose that guy. He literally is not a Mariner anymore. They lose that player. And if he doesn't choose to opt out, it's because he had such a bad season that he can't make more money, which means the Mariners are now sitting on a guy who's almost certainly on a contract that's upside down. All to what? Get the Mariners over the hump to lose in the first round? Don't do that. Don't put a new Mitch Haniger on the team next year. A new Mitch Garver on the team next year. Just to appease a fan base that's hungry? No. I would have loved to see the Mariners do more this offseason. I would love to see the Mariners be able to have a guy like Mitch Haniger and a guy like Mitch Garver on their roster and still spend money. To be able to have a couple of these, like what in football they would be dead money, these dead money contracts on your roster, maybe even release those guys and still go spend money to improve your team. But that's not the Mariners. So if that's not the Mariners, I don't want to see them go sign Pete Alonso to a 3-year, $75 million deal with 2 opt-outs, and then Alonso craters completely in 2025, and the Mariners have to pay him $50 million, and we're back in this same boat where they can't afford to add significant pieces to the roster. At this point in the offseason, like I said a couple weeks ago, punt to next year, punt to the year after, whatever year, but like don't overspend on the guys that are left. Don't give super player-friendly, bad deals, lose-lose deals to these guys that are left. Now, if you get Alex Bregman for 3 years, $75 million straight up, of course you jump at that. But if they could, they probably... I mean, there's no way Alex Bregman's taking that. Also, like I said, no in his prime hitter who thinks he is worth more than the market will pay him at the moment is coming to Seattle to have a platform year. It's just not, I mean, these guys are not coming here to show the league that they are more valuable because T-Mobile is the hardest ballpark to hit in the league. And it's not close. So fully punt the season. That's where I'm at, is like just fully do it. Get the role players to fill those spots. Do not, though, more than anything in the world, do not sign a guy to a 3-year deal with 2 opt-outs, because that will be the thing that will entice him to come to Seattle. Seattle right now is not an attractive place for free agents. That's true. That's unfortunate, but that's true. That's the way it is. Don't compound the problem by making these stupid signings. All right. Come see me do stand-up. On that note, come see me do stand-up comedy, please. No one's going to, but let's do it anyway. Let's talk about it anyway. February 5th, Seven Cedars Casino with Gabe Rutledge. Gabe is the best comic in the Pacific Northwest. On February 12th, I will be at Tacoma Comedy Club's 6th and Proctor location, opening for Ronan Hirschberg, another buddy of mine. I think February 16th, we're doing a Make Me Famous show at Tacoma Comedy Club, and I will be on the Roast-A-Mania show, roasting my buddy Jess Everett, February 23rd. Come out to any one of those shows and go to CaseyMcLeanComedy.com to check out live shows that I have, adding shows all the time. Check those out. Thank you, Casey McLean Comedy, at on every social media platform except for X, where I'm DCasey McLean. Thank you for watching this podcast. Maybe I'll be back later this week. Maybe not.